Good morning, everybody. Here we are with Kuntres Bikkur Chicago, Touching a City's Soul. It has been a life, at least for me, I don't know about you guys, but it has been a life-changing sefer as a whole, and definitely this maamer. I've been living with it a lot, and this whole concept of histaklos, to see the things that we're learning and to really see it with our mind's eye and be able to have that type of awareness and sensitivity. So that in of itself has made a huge, huge impact. I also wanted to mention before we get started that for everyone who has the Chayinu for Parshas Bahaleischa, I guess I don't know when somebody's going to be watching this, but it's Tafshin Pei. So in the back, it says Hasidic story. It's on page 186. It's actually originally from the Pirkei Avos, but the problem is that they don't put which one. It just says page 1486, but they don't put which of the volumes, because each of the volumes has its own page numbering. So anyway, it's absolutely amazing, and it talks about the importance of learning, not just learning Chassidus for what it is, but also understanding the terminology in Chassidus is, or in the Chassidic lexicon, as they say in all these funny translations, is lachluchis, and it means the moisture, the bonding together. And it's beautiful how the Pirkei Avos describes this concept, that somebody who just learns in the books, whether it's Shulchan Aruch, whether it's a maamer, whether it's sichas, whether whatever it is, and just learns in the books, but doesn't take the time to spend that time together with other Chassidim, to learn from other Chassidim, to learn about things that happen in Lubavitch way back when, to learn the history of Chabad, to learn, to hear all these different stories of what happened before, then it's kind of as if you're building a building with just the cold bricks. The lachluchis, the brotherhood, so it's the sisterhood that gets bonded, it gets created. It's the cement, so to speak, that moisture. That's the real translation. Lachluchis is moisture, but that moisture that bonds this learning together has to be done by spending quality time with other Chassidim, by learning about what happened in Lubavitch, how things were, how the history, the Rebbeim, all these different things. And the way the Pirkei Avos explains it is just absolutely incredible. So I strongly suggest, if you have the Chayinu at home with you, take a moment, go to page 1886 for the last week's Chayinu, and read that little section. And if you don't, so then look it up. It's technically the Pirkei Avos, page 1486. I don't know which 1486, so that's the only sad part. I have to go do a search over yonder. But anyway, so I wanted to bring up the fact that this sefer, in my opinion, brings a lot of lachluchis, because it actually, all the sichas in the beginning and the sichas after speak a lot about these kinds of concepts, what used to happen, how, and most of the Pirkei Avos writings have this concept of really bringing to life how Lubavitch used to be, how Chassidim used to live, how Chassidim, how we are meant to live. And I wanted to share the series, Historical Sketches, which is all sections and pieced together from the diary of the Pirkei Avos. So this one is the particular one I just finished, but there's tons of them out there, and you can really appreciate a lot about Chassidus, not just the intellectual aspect of learning a maamer, but also the warmth between Chassidim, the warmth of learning from other Chassidim that lived in that time, etc., etc. So anyway, that was I think it's an important thing to note, that we should work on not just that, but also taking the time to find Chassidim now in our day and age that we can learn from, whether it's from a book. There's Shadar, there's amazing, incredible books about these types of Chassidim. There's the Parisian, I think it's called. Right now I'm reading this. It's a bit intense, so I'm going to give you guys a heads up. It's intense, but Subota I had to put it down the first time I read it, but now I'm pushing through. But either way, it gives you this sensitivity gives you a lachluchos. It gives you this awareness of how real Chassidim live these concepts. That this concept that we're learning in a maamer needs to be lived, and when we learn about how other Chassidim lived and how the history of Chabad and all of these things, we get that sensitivity, we get that awareness. Okay, so we're currently on page 72. We are only 2 ICAs away from finishing the maamer, which is a huge, incredible feat, and kol hakavod to everyone for joining us in this journey. And today, in today's ice and the 5th chapter, we are actually going to start to tie in together. Remember, I told you we start with a pasuk, then we delve deeply. So, for example, one of the first things we spoke about was this concept about why bitachon and then emunah, and in the pasuk it says Batach Hashem v'asei tov, and then later on we brought the emunah that you'll live and be sustained, you'll be nourished by your emunah. And so why are we talking about bitachon first? Generally, emunah is the first thing we discussed. We brought in 2 different opinions. One opinion was, or 2.5 different opinions. One opinion was the Ramban, and he spoke about that somebody who lives with bitachon, meaning they really truly, which is, by the way, this book, this guy lives with a lot of bitachon, and it's so incredible to see it. But anyway, so somebody who lives with bitachon, it's a given that they have emunah. You can't have bitachon, you can't trust in Hashem that Hashem is going to do as you want, as you think is right, and really give yourself over in heart and in soul and your mind and your thoughts to this concept without believing that Hashem's in charge. That just doesn't work. So the Ramban explains that somebody who has bitachon already has emunah. That said, someone who has emunah, now we're learning in Tanya Shar Yichud Emunah, we're learning all of these concepts, how God creates the world step by step, and all of these things that may not necessarily translate to bitachon in your life. That may mean that next time, chas v'shalom, there's a test, you get a bill that you don't know how you're meant to pay, or you get some interesting news that you weren't, expecting. Not necessarily will you directly jump to bitachon. Hashem's in charge, but it may not be in the forefront of your mind at that point in time. So having bitachon, having emunah, may not necessarily mean that you have bitachon, but having bitachon may mean that you have emunah. Not only that, but there's a concept which we discussed in the first ice about this concept that emunah is, in a certain sense, it's easily sparked. It's easily made, recharged. You just learn a little bit and you realize, Hashem's in charge. Now, meanwhile, the Rebbe Rashab brought a different opinion, so to speak, or seemingly it seems different. And he says, what do you mean? Emunah needs to be fed and sustained, it needs to be nourished, it needs to be worked on, it needs to be added. And so the Frierdiker Rebbe comes and says, okay, now we need to understand this. What does it mean to feed and sustain? Period. What does it mean to feed and sustain? In order to understand how to feed and sustain emunah, we need to know how to understand how to feed and sustain in general. So we went into a beautiful discussion about food and drink, and how having food and drink and drinking consistently and taking good care of us, and even the Frierdiker Rebbe goes to the point to say, which, by the way, if you ever think Chassidus doesn't have the answers to everything, you should know Chassidus has the answers to everything. The Frierdiker Rebbe himself says, the healthier your food choices are, the better your neshama will connect to your body, the better that bond, which seemingly is insane, something of a lesser degree of holiness, right? The speaking, the alive, the animate, and the vegetative, and then the inanimate. So in all of this, we're on the top. We're the thinking, speaking, but meanwhile we have to eat the animals, and we have to eat the vegetables, and we have to eat all these different things that are, so to speak, lower to us. And somehow these things that are lower than us, whether it's eggs, whether it's vegetables, whether it's water, whether it's, whatever that is, these things that are lower than us, so to speak, give us a life to be able to connect our body with our neshama. And when we don't eat, our body and our neshama start to not be connected to each other. They start to separate to the point that somebody chas v'shalom could fully pass away by starvation, by not eating. Okay, so we had to learn what it means to feed and sustain. We have to take something which seemingly is external, and when we intake it into our bodies, that external thing bonds the relationship with our neshama and our body. That's what it does. So making the right choices when you eat and being aware of your eating choices is very, very important. Chassidus explains it here. The better the choices you make, the better is the bond and relationship between your body and your soul. Now, we then went on, and I'm giving a full recap because today we're gonna hopefully tie in a lot of these concepts. So we then went on to understand this whole concept of Raya Mehemna. So seemingly we went, whoa, 1 second. We just fed and sustained our body, and now we're going to, Raya Mehemna. So yes, it was seemingly a jump in topics, but we'll see how they're tied in together. Okay, so we went to this whole concept that Moshe Rabbeinu is a Raya Mehemna, and his neshama, which comes from, again, for the second billionth time, this is not an actual physical representation of what it is. I'm just giving an imagery. Okay, so this is Atzmos. This is God's infiniteness. And then once Hashem decided he's going to make a world that's going to be a separate, so seemingly it feels itself separate from him, but it's obviously it's the same tub of Play-Doh, as we've always said, right? So Hashem made a makom panoi, an empty space, and in that empty space, he took his own quote-unquote Play-Doh and had to shape, so to speak. I'm just literally using a very watered-down version, but shape into different worlds, and each of those worlds gave more of an ability for the bottom world, so to speak, to feel itself separate entities. So even though we aren't, we are all made of the exact same Kedusha. We are all made of everything in this world is made of the exact same Hashem Play-Doh, so to speak. We feel ourselves separate. I feel myself separate than, what's in front of me, and you guys feel separate than what's around your room. So Hashem, in these worlds, Moshe Rabbeinu's neshama comes from Atzilus. Other neshamas come there's different neshamas from each of the worlds, that's their source. But Moshe Rabbeinu, it says Moshe, without any cantillation, without any pause in the cantillation in between them, which means that his neshama, his source is in Atzilus, and when it went down, it went through the entire process. It took a trip all the way to Australia, as we said, and it was not exhausted at all. It didn't suffer, so to speak. It didn't go through any type of I wouldn't say diminishing, but it didn't go through any type of tarnishing or diminishing or whatever. And just the way as it is above is the way it is below. Meanwhile, we see from other tzaddikim, and again, it's not a negative thing. We're just showing how miraculous Moshe Rabbeinu's neshama was. And we see from other tzaddikim that even though Avram Avinu's source of his neshama is also up here in Atzilus, a certain section of Chesed, because Avram Avinu represents Chesed, that even though that's so, as it went through, the neshama did go through a process of, it got exhausted through the trip, so to speak. And by the time it reached Avram Avinu down here, Avram himself said, it's as Afar V'Afer, it's as it's dust and ashes. So we learned from this that Moshe Rabbeinu has a very special type of neshama, and there's something we need to realize about this, and that's why he's called Raya Mehemna. He feeds and sustains our emunah, and we're going to learn more. We're going to tie this together, what that means. What does it mean to feed and sustain the emunah? And then, 1 second, let me just make sure I didn't miss anything. Then in the next ice, we went into this concept of Zera Adam and Zera Behema. And what's the difference, right? So let me just bring out the difference between Zera Adam and Zera Behema. Zera Adam, the seed of man, so to speak. What's the difference between man and an animal? That an animal has no das. It doesn't have this contemplative awareness. It doesn't have this ability to bond and to connect with certain concepts. It doesn't have the ability to really understand a conceptual thing. So for example, as I said, even if we were to manage to teach, some sort of animal, whether it's a monkey or whatever, to read, it will not have the ability to take the concepts that he reads in the book and really understand them. It's a different type of living. And so Zer Adam, man, we have this ability to have das. We have an ability to connect. We have an ability to understand. We have an ability to take a concept that's, so to speak, just intellectual and really bring it down. And we're actually going to learn a little bit more about das, which is really, really special, hopefully in the next day or two. And that's Zer Adam. So if a neshama comes from its source here in Atzilus, so then that neshama, even though it's down here in this world, has this innate ability to be able to sense spirituality even in the world where we don't see it readily with our eyes. So we gave a bunch of different examples how the Rebbe, suddenly knew things that we couldn't, we wouldn't be able to see on our own. Or the Alter Rebbe knew, which malachim were singing at what point. Or the Baal Shem Tov, the beautiful Baal Shem Tov story that I gave a few classes ago about, that the Baal Shem Tov was able to tell that certain, this person's neshama was in such a high level, and somehow he did something, and that neshama was in, the highest realms. So again, certain types of people come from, their sources, neshamas and Atzilus, and they have this sensitivity, this awareness for Kedusha. They see that when they put a penny in the pushka, they don't just walk off. They see what it does. They see it elevated, as we beautifully, many sichos in this past week's parsha about lighting up, Aaron lit up the menorah. So when we do things, we light up the house, and we, my son and my husband learned a beautiful sikha about how children, when they do a mitzvah, they're literally the Kohen Gadol walking around in the house, elevating and lighting up the house. And so does my son necessarily feel every time he puts a penny? No, but he has to have, we work. The rest of us who don't have this, innate sensation for spirituality, we work towards building it. And that's what the maamer is coming to tell us now. That we are able to grow, to nurture a sensitivity for Kedusha, that we're able to, and each one in our own level. It's possible that there's certain things that are harder for certain people and certain things that are easier for certain people to feel. Some people call Nidre on Yom Kippur night, they feel that. They feel it. Some people, Pesach Seder, they feel it. Some people feel it when they do, when they learn a maamer. And each person in their own sense, in their own sensitivity, they need to grow and build that sensitivity so that they're able to have more awareness of the importance of Kedusha in their lives and what it does in general, what it does for them and what it does in general to the world. And so we can, as long as we hone in on this sensitivity for spirituality, we can live a much more spiritual life. We can live a much more spiritually aware life. We can put on our Hashem glasses on a more regular basis and see Kedusha in this world. Histakel. We can actually see it, even if we don't physically see it with our eyes, we can see it with our mind's eye. We're able to really feel it. We're able to have that das, that bond, that connection. Okay. So that was a long introduction, but you'll understand because now we're going to start putting all these pieces together to be able to understand. Here we are. Okay, so we're on page 72, the 5th chapter. However, okay, so I forgot one last piece, which is this whole concept that when we look into these three things, we are on it says actually it's this week's Pirkei Avos, the 3rd chapter, the first section, the first one of the 3rd chapter of Pirkei Avos, that histakel, look into, and you will not come to sin. So it's like if you look into this, then you will not come into sin. So then at the end the last class we did, we spoke about how as much as it doesn't mean that it will prevent you magically from doing it, but when you see these three things in your mind's eye, it'll give you an awareness of Kedusha, it'll give you an awareness of Hashem, and it'll stop you, not in a magical sense, but it'll make you aware of your actions, and hopefully you won't come to commit a transgression, a sin, chas v'shalom. Meanwhile, in the sense of positivity, So if you histakel these things and the Holy One, blessed be He, attaches a positive thought to a positive deed, as opposed to the negative. On the negative, Hashem does not. Even if Chas v'Shalom we have a negative thought, Hashem doesn't assume and doesn't count it as if you did it. But meanwhile, if it's a positive thought, Hashem does count it as if you did it. And not only that, but we explained here even further that what really happens is, not only does Hashem count it as if you did it, but Hashem also makes it possible by ways of hashgacha pratis if you really are committed to doing it. Last Fridays, a full davening is very hard for me because there's a lot happening and Shabbos is coming and whatever. And I was nervous I wasn't going to be able to do my davening, even though, because as soon as we finished the class, I had to run to take care of my kids' school and da-da-da-da-da. And I walked past my sitter and I said, you know what? I'm going to use the concept that we just learned. I really, truly want to daven today, and I want to make this a reality. And so I said, I'm going to have this desire, and Hashem's going to help me that the hashgacha pratis is going to work out, that as soon as I finish, taking care of my kids' online school, I'm going to be able to daven. And you know what? It did. It happened. It worked. And this is exactly what we just learned. So we see that for the good, Hashem makes it happen. Not only does He count the positive thought as an action, but He also helps you have hashgacha pratis that you will actually make it work. Okay, we only have a few minutes. Sorry about that. However, all of the above refers to the attribute of goodness, whereas regarding to the attribute of punishment, Hashem doesn't attach an evil thought to a deed, right? So for negative, Hashem does not connect the two. Thus, the evil thought and the person's actions are not attached, but it is only that they are unattached. A trace of the thought nevertheless remains. So even if Hashem doesn't count it as if we did it, let's say we have a juicy piece of Lashon Hara, we're about to tell it to somebody, and we think about telling it to that person, but we don't. Hashem doesn't count it as if you actually said it. At the same time, that trace of that desire is still there. That trace doesn't get, magically erased. And you have to be aware of that you did have this negative thought. However, and this is the key, through the avodah of histaklus, through seeing with your mind's eye, taking kedusha and seeing it and having that sensitivity to see it with your mind's eye, even the trace of an evil thought is removed. So by connecting to Hashem and spirituality and really making it so real in your life that you're able to see with your mind's eye, even that trace of negativity gets removed. This avodah is the food of faith. Remember we discussed about feeding and sustaining food of faith? This avodah is the food of faith, food that strengthens one's emunah. So by us working on learning and connecting to Hashem in such a way that we're able to see it, we're able to see what we're learning, we're able to really visualize it in our mind's eye and connect with it and bond to it as if we saw with our own eyes. There's a difference between reading about some tiger and seeing the tiger with your mind's eye, or seeing the tiger with your real eyes, and so therefore you're able to see it with your mind's eye at any point in time. When we bond and connect to Kedusha in such a way that we work towards seeing it in our mind's eye, it's able to give us food. It's the food of faith, and it's able to remove even negative thoughts. Similar to the way in which physical food and drink bind the spiritual faculties of the soul to the limbs of the physical body. What characterizes this avodah is the ability to sense the holiness of the Torah in its letters and logical reasoning, to truly feel the holiness of Hashem invested in Torah. Okay, so that's one aspect of it. Okay, and the fact is that we need to learn Torah not just for an intellectual exercise, not just, let me understand Torah because this is what I'm meant to do. We are meant to want to connect to Hashem. We're meant to see the Kedusha, the holiness, the fact that when we learn Torah, we connect to God's holiness. And when we do that, we're able to bond and connect to it even better. And in addition to this, also in davening, in prayer, the avodah of histaklus is the sensitivity to the divine concepts expressed in the words of prayer. So it's not just mumbo jumbo, mumbo jumbo, mumbo jumbo, mumbo jumbo. We need to work towards knowing Pirkei Avos. We need to work towards knowing what we're saying. We need to work towards histakel, to see with our mind's eye. When we talk about certain things in davening, we need to work towards bonding and connecting to it, to see what's going on. What are we saying? This is not only this is to say not only one's understanding and grasp of the concepts, but what one feels. In the Avodah, there are a number of forms and different levels, each person according to their spiritual stature and situation. So each of us, some of us may know Pirkei Avos already, and now we need to work towards connecting to that. Not just, okay, the tree and the rivers and the blah, and the levels of the heavens and all these things, but to actually bond and connect to it. We have to grow. We have to feed and sustain this awareness of holiness in our lives. We have to feed and sustain it when we learn Torah. We have to feed and sustain it when we daven. Because when we do these things, they give us a vision. They give us a real clear picture for our mind's eye to bond and connect to Hashem. And it's as if you have a best friend. It's kind of like a pen pal. You have a pen pal you write with, but then you actually meet the pen pal, and it's a whole different level of bonding and connecting with a person. So too with learning, just learning plain and simple. It's as if you're writing each other letters. But when you actually work towards connecting to what you're reading, to what you're davening, to what you're learning, and you want to visualize it, you want to see it in your mind's eye, you want to bond and connect with it, it's as if you just met that pen pal. You just met Hashem face to face, so to speak. Which is one of the things I wanted to, why I started with this whole concept of the Chayenu, this lachluchos. That Chassidus isn't just a sefer in of itself. There's the warmth of Chassidim and how Chassidim live. There's the warmth of the Rebbeim and knowing more about the Rebbeim, knowing more about our history. And it gives us that lachluchos, that sensitivity, that awareness. And I really strongly, again, if you have last week's Chayenu, please take a moment to read it. And it gives you that awareness, that warmth to make it real. It's not just a cold intellectual learning. You need to have the warmth. It needs to be histakel. You need to be able to see with your mind's eye. Anyway, hope to see you guys tomorrow, Mitzvah Hashem. Have a wonderful Sunday.